In the heart of 17th century France, long before forensic science or modern justice, the fear of poison gripped the nobility with chilling intensity. A single sip of wine, a dusting of powder, or a touch of perfume could spell death. And behind each mysterious death, the court suspected a hidden poisoner, lurking in plain sight. Armed with subtlety and silence, the monarchy responded with paranoia. King Louis XIV, increasingly disturbed by the rise of poison plots among courtiers, established a secret tribunal to handle such cases, the Chambre Ardente, or burning chamber. It wasn't named for the punishments, though they were terrifying, but for the literal flaming torches that illuminated its secret trials, held behind closed doors. This chamber didn't rely on public juries or daylight proceedings. It was a shadow court for crimes that the state deemed too dangerous, too delicate, or too disruptive to handle openly. Here, accusations of poisoning were met with swift condemnation, and the methods of execution reflected the hidden, corrosive nature of the crime. And one of the most horrifying punishments, mostly forgotten until now, involved leeches. Yes, leeches. Those small, slimy creatures typically used by medieval physicians to balance the humors. They were intended to heal, to purge bad blood. But in the Chambre Ardente, the very thing meant to save life was twisted into a slow and agonizing execution. According to archival records recovered from French legal scrolls and writings of the time, certain convicted poisoners, especially women caught supplying toxic herbs or powders to the elite, were stripped naked, bound to wooden planks, and laid in shallow stone basins. These basins were not only cold and uncomfortable, they were filled with hundreds of live, hungry leeches. The purpose? To let the leeches bleed them to death. This was no instant execution. The process took hours, sometimes even longer. Leeches attached slowly, with 3 jaws and rows of tiny teeth that sawed gently into flesh. Once latched on, they inject a chemical cocktail, anesthetics to dull pain, and anticoagulants to keep the blood flowing freely. On a sick patient, a few leeches might be harmless. On a healthy prisoner left under a swarm, deadly. Executioners and royal physicians would monitor this scene not to ease the process, but to ensure that the condemned didn't pass out too early. The goal was prolonged suffering, a slow draining that mirrored the slow kill methods used by poisoners. The state, in its cruel irony, wanted them to feel the same invisible death they had allegedly caused. In some executions, observers noted how the victims tried to scream, but as their blood pressure dropped, their voices grew weaker, their breaths shallow. Some fainted halfway through and were revived with cold water or slaps to the face. They didn't want them unconscious. They wanted them aware. Historical accounts from 1680 describe one particular execution. A young apothecary's assistant accused of supplying powdered arsenic to a noblewoman, which led to the slow death of the woman's husband. During the trial, the assistant denied everything, but under torture, he confessed. The Chambre Ardente sentenced him to leech execution. The record shows he was laid across a stone table, arms bound with rope, mouth gagged with cloth. One by one, the leeches were applied to his limbs, his chest, his groin, even his neck. They left them on until they swelled with his blood, then replaced them with new. No one intervened. No one cried out in mercy. The room watched in silence as the blood drained away, not with blades, but with mouths. Why such a punishment? Because the court believed poisoners were traitors to the human body. While others killed with swords or fire, poisoners attacked the blood itself, silently, slowly, with invisible death. So the punishment mirrored the crime, a symbolic draining, a ritualistic response to an invisible weapon. And make no mistake, this wasn't a widespread public execution like hanging or burning. Leech executions were private, controlled, and reserved for cases the court wanted to bury in secrecy. The silence was intentional. The message was not for the people. It was for the elite. Do not trust your servants. Do not play with powders. And if you do, this is what awaits you. Perhaps most disturbingly, The leech executions weren't seen as cruelty at the time. In the warped logic of 17th century justice, they were scientific. The state was simply using biology to punish, turning the tools of medicine into instruments of death. To them, it was elegant, poetic, even. In other cases, it's said that the condemned were forced to prepare their own execution, selecting the jars of leeches they would die by, whether symbolic or actual. These rituals turned the act of death into something deeply psychological, forcing the accused to participate in their own destruction. By the early 18th century, this practice faded. As the Enlightenment swept through Europe, medical practice began distancing itself from bloodletting, and the Chambre Ardente was officially dissolved by royal decree. The idea of using leeches to kill, even poisoners, became viewed as barbaric, unfit for a modern state. But whispers of the punishment remain in French folklore. In some regions, old nurses once told children that bad blood brings the leeches, a phrase that didn't mean sickness, but guilt, a leftover warning from a time when justice was both silent and soaked in blood. While the execution method itself was macabre, what made it more terrifying was how ritualized it became, especially in the final years of the Chambre Ardente. Court officials did not treat this punishment as a crude killing. It was viewed as a twisted form of judicial surgery, a punishment that drained guilt the way physicians claim to drain ill humors. Surviving notes from court physicians, such as those recorded in the Archives nationales de France, describe how specific leech placements were chosen not just for efficiency, but for symbolism. Leeches were placed on the tongue if the poisoner was said to have whispered deadly secrets. They were applied to the wrists if the accused had mixed toxins by hand. And perhaps most cruelly, some were placed near the heart, as if to pull out the evil that lived within. There's an infamous case from 1679 involving a woman named Madeleine d'Aubray, the daughter of a French magistrate, accused of murdering her brother, and to lovers using poison cakes. She was connected to the larger scandal of the Affair of the Poisons, a series of events that exposed a hidden underworld of witches, fortune tellers, and poison peddlers in the French elite. Though Madeleine was eventually executed by fire, her rumored apprentice, a kitchen maid named Elise, faced the leeches. Her case, uncovered in trial transcripts and letters by contemporary observers, is one of the most documented leech executions ever recorded. On the morning of her sentence, Elise was paraded through a quiet courtyard inside the Bastille, not the grand execution square. She was shackled and stripped in the cold. Laid down in a shallow copper basin, court physicians arrived with 2 wooden crates, each containing hundreds of starving medicinal leeches, which had been deliberately starved for days prior. Witnesses describe how the leeches were applied in waves, first to the arms, then to the legs, then to her sides and stomach. At first, Elise resisted, thrashing, spitting, screaming through the gag. But as the blood began to flow, her strength weakened. Her limbs began to tremble involuntarily. Her skin turned gray. One scribe wrote, "She went quiet by the 3rd hour, though her heart still thudded beneath the leeches." The floor turned black with her blood. It wasn't just the blood loss that killed. It was the trauma, the overwhelming shock to the nervous system. The body panics when drained slowly. The cold, the clamps, the sheer horror of having dozens of mouths digging into your flesh. It caused seizures, hallucinations, and slow, crawling death. Another chilling layer to this punishment: it was often denied final rites. Because poison was seen as the devil's method, stealthy, cruel, and unnatural, those convicted were sometimes refused confession or last prayers. The Chambre Ardente saw them as not just criminals, but spiritual traitors. So, imagine, you're naked, strapped to stone, denied the presence of a priest. Around you, robed men silently watch as your body is consumed, not by flame or blade, but by creatures you can't fight. Silent, wet, blind parasites that never stop. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the leech execution was the public's lack of knowledge. These weren't spectacles in town squares like guillotines or hangings. They were hidden punishments, recorded in quiet ink by judges and clerks, spoken of only in whispers by guards who passed the cells. The absence of public eyes made the practice even more feared because it became myth. And myth breeds nightmares. Even in noble circles, stories circulated of secret leech rooms, of lovers who betrayed a duke being led to underground chambers only to disappear forever, of cooks, maids, and mistresses accused of quiet murders and vanishing without trial. What happened to them? The common answer: they bled for it. And all of this took place during one of France's most chaotic periods. A time when political enemies used poison like modern politicians use scandals. With paranoia in the palace, the Chambre Ardente became both judge and executioner, a place where rumor alone could drain your blood. In 1682, Louis XIV, under pressure to reform, finally abolished the Chambre Ardente. The public had become increasingly disturbed by the secret executions, the lack of transparency, and the disturbing blend of torture and science. By then, many of the trial records had already been sealed, burned, or buried in private vaults, but fragments survived, enough to piece together a legacy soaked in irony. Because this wasn't medieval barbarism. This was early modern France, the France of opera, of Enlightenment thinkers, of candlelit courts and powdered wigs. And yet here, within the finest halls of Versailles, were punishments that blurred the line between doctor and executioner. Some historians argue that the use of leeches was a reflection of societal obsession with control. Poison represented loss of control, a death that came without warning, without drama. So the punishment had to restore control, not through rage, but through ritual, through calculation, through the body being emptied, drop by drop, until nothing remained. There is even evidence that some physicians kept journals on the effectiveness of the executions, writing down how long the victims took to die, how many leeches it required, and which body parts bled the most. Whether for medical curiosity or cruel science, it's hard to say, but it cements one truth. This was a punishment of eerie precision. Today, all that remains of these punishments are scattered lines and forgotten ledgers, letters passed between judges, and vague recollections in the memoirs of guards. The public never saw the bodies. They never heard the final screams. Only the records knew the truth. And now, so do we. As the years passed, the stories of leech-based execution faded in the folklore. Not because they were disproven, but because they were too horrific for civilized memory. What nation wants to admit it once used medical tools as weapons of the state? That something as mundane, as supposedly healing as a leech, became an instrument of calculated, bureaucratic cruelty, and yet the signs remain. Hidden in the archives of the Bibliothèque Nationale de France are physician logs with entire pages crossed out, entire cases lost during the transition to the new royal courts. Marginalia, small handwritten notes in the edges, refer to drainings, wet death, or justice. Via bloodletting, some priests refused to administer final sacraments to poisoners, claiming their crimes were beyond fire, beyond blade. They must be cured in their own evil. It's a chilling reminder that not all torture involved whips or racks. Some came in silence, applied one soft bite at a time. The metaphor is unmistakable. Poison was an invisible killer. And so the state replied with an equally slow and invisible revenge. They didn't scream or flail like those burned at the stake. No. These victims simply wilted, like flowers left without water, like candles slowly flickering out. Today, when we think of historical torture, we think of the rack, the Iron Maiden, the executioner's axe. But few ever mention the basin of leeches, a punishment so unique, so biologically cruel, that it slipped beneath the surface of history, unnoticed like its victims. But it happened. It's documented. It was real. The Chambre Ardente no longer exists. The secret trials, the torchlit verdicts, the physicians in execution robes, all gone. But the legacy of what they did lives on in old ink and whispered stories. And in that legacy, one truth echoes: Sometimes the most horrifying tortures come not from noise, but from silence, from creatures that whisper rather than roar, from punishments not scream, but sucked. You've been watching Torture's Room, where history doesn't whisper, it bleeds.